So last week I saw the new Spider-Man Far From Home movie, and so let's talk about that. So going into this movie, I had very low, or not very low, but low-ish expectations as opposed to like seeing other Marvel movies. And to be honest, after I heard what this movie was going to be about, being about Mysterio, I really didn't care much about the movie. I kind of forgot about that. That ended being after the atrocity of Endgame. My hopes weren't really up on the ups in this movie. I didn't really care all that much, but I was still definitely going to go see it. I didn't expect this movie to be much better or much worse than the first Spider-Man Homecoming. I didn't really think that movie was all that great either compared to the Marvel movies, but it was still a good movie, and this movie was overall a pretty good movie in my opinion. So I didn't even think they were going to talk about this, but they did briefly in the beginning of the movie. They call it the blip, where, everyone, 50% of people vanished, and then 5 years later they all blipped back, and they call it the blip. And the name, whatever, I really don't care what they call it, or the decimation or the blip. It's whatever it is what it is. And they literally explain that everyone who vanished just reappears the same age and exactly what they were doing as when it happened. That means that everybody who was on like a plane when the snap happened just fell from the sky and fucking died. And everyone who was on a boat probably just drowned. And people who were in the middle of a street, some of them probably got ran over right when they came back. Or, something crazy like that. Which is crazy, and I don't know if everyone's like on board with like how much that would cause in like the natural everyday world, but half the population just leaving and then coming back like nothing happened 5 years later is crazy, and society is not going to come back from that super quick. Like, first of all, I'm pretty sure that if 50% of the population on Earth vanished, we would immediately go into some form of apocalyptic realm. Schools would shut down, governments would shut down, places would shut down. Shit would be bouncing off the walls. It would take a while for us to get back to society from the decimation, and then again, all those people coming back, 50% of the population is coming back after 5 years, not aged or changed at all, would probably also cause some form of apocalypse. Probably not as bad as the first one, but it's still going to take, decades for the planet to get back on track with its schedule. And in the movie, they explained how, like, they just kept on going with school, and they just came back in the middle of it, and they just reset everyone and made everybody start from, like, the same grade. That doesn't make any sense in the real world, and it would be insanely hard to implement. I really can't imagine that any school would keep going if half the population disappeared, teachers disappearing, parents disappearing, kids disappearing. That would be insane. There'd be orphans and, whatnot all over the place from that, and they just make it sound so willy-nilly. And to be honest, I thought they weren't even going to mention it. I thought they were just going to, okay, well, that part makes no sense, so we're just not even going to mention it. But they did, and it's kind of a swing or miss if they did. Either way, it's not going to make any sense, because that's not how the real world would work. I know it's a movie and whatnot, but that just doesn't make any sense. But I thought it's funny that they did mention it, and they called it the blip. So when I found out Mysterio was going to be the main villain of this movie, I obviously knew that he was going to be a villain, because that's who Mysterio is. I don't think he's ever been a good guy. But I immediately was like 99% sure, oh, it's all an illusion, because that's what Mysterio does. Like, if you know the character Mysterio, it should not be any surprise at all that he's going to be the villain, and he's going to be using illusions. And I guess some people didn't know that going into the movie. They did zero research because they didn't want to, quote, spoil it for themselves, which, if you're doing research on, like, the comics of a superhero movie that's coming out, I really don't think it's going to spoil all that much for you unless it's, like, verbatim exactly what the movie is like, which would kind of just be kind of a weird movie, Still good, but I mean kind of weird. I definitely would do my research. I did my research on the Black Order before I saw Infinity War, because I had no idea who those were. I didn't want to just sit in the theater watching random aliens run around without knowing anything about them. But in the end, doing any research on them didn't really help, because it didn't really use any of their Infinity War Endgame didn't really use any of their like actual tactics or lore in the movie at all. They were just kind of like foot soldiers, which was kind of lame, but whatever. I knew that Mysterio was going to be a whole illusion the whole time. He was going to end up being the villain, and kind of how it was going to play out. But I wasn't really as much spoiled as just like knowing not being too surprised about it. I did, however, think it was kind of cool how like all the like, Mysterio and all the people who worked with Mysterio had a problem with Stark in the past, and they've all kind of geared up into like making Mysterio the next Iron Man. I thought that was actually a pretty cool concept, and I liked the part in that scene where they were all like laughing and singing and whatnot about how they hated Stark and how they're all coming together to make Mysterio the next Iron Man. It was a little lame though how the elementals were not actually elementals and they were just illusions. I was kind of looking forward to like there being more mysterious entities out there, but they were all illusions in the end, which I saw coming, but it's just a little disappointing that there's not going to be anything like that. And yeah, it would have been kind of interesting to watch Spider-Man kind of deal with villains he didn't really know how to deal with. How is Spider-Man supposed to beat a giant water monster in a different country, or a giant lava fire monster or a tornado entity? It kind of would have been interesting to watch Peter Parker try and like come to this like evolving state where he has to realize he needs to think of new ways to use his powers to defeat these villains who he's never thought about having to face before. That would have been kind of interesting, but we didn't really see anything like that. We still did see Spider-Man kind of like, developing more into Spider-Man from, just the guy to turning into actual Spider-Man and overcoming these obstacles he thought he didn't have to face, which I don't think they've had a lot of for this Spider-Man so far, which they've had a lot of in the previous Spider-Man movies, but not this one. So I hear a lot of people talking about like who they think the best Spider-Man is, and like 99% of people just go with the newest one, which I think is pretty cliche. But I can see why somebody would obviously think that Tom Holland plays a better Spider-Man, and this is doing Spider-Man than the other Spider-Man movies. But I honestly just can't agree. To be honest, this Peter Parker is just pretty more cringy to me than the other ones. And then again, I don't think the other two Spider-Man series, the other Spider-Man movies, I don't think they're all that much better. I really wish I had like a fusion of all three of the Spider-Mans into like this one perfect Spider-Man that I could really wholeheartedly say like that's our Spider-Man type of shit. But I don't know, I really don't think Tom Holland is the best. I'd probably go with the first Spider-Man, to be honest, just because that's more memorable. The Amazing Spider-Man was also good, but probably not as good as the first one, in my opinion. It's not really much about the movies, but it's just like the acting and the portraying of Spider-Man. I think a lot of people like Tom Holland Spider-Man because it's like supposed to be like a younger, more of a goofball Spider-Man, which is more how Spider-Man was supposed to be like portrayed in the comics. But I mean, I don't know. It's just more cringe to me, to be honest. Leading off with that, some of the downfalls of the movie were just pointless scenes that didn't really seem to progress the story at all. There was the progression of like the love story between Peter Parker and the is she named MJ? I think she is MJ in the movie. But like the scene where Peter is on the bus and he's messing with the glasses thing. What are those called? Edith is the name of the glasses that Tony Stark passed on to Peter Parker. But the scene where it showed him on the bus messing with it and him actually accidentally calling in a drone strike on that other guy was really just a pointless scene in my opinion, and was really cringy because it's like it was a simple just tell him to call off the drone strike, but he made it seem like it was so much more difficult than that. And before that, the scene where the bus driver guy tells him to go into that little hut room, and there's that really tall like Russian woman telling him to take off his clothes and put on this suit, and that was just kind of a pointless cringe scene in my opinion. The guy walked in on them, and then Peter chased him out, and the guy said some stuff and Peter said some stuff, and it caused conflict between the two of them, which was actually kind of interesting. But in the end, that scene was just completely useless. Besides that, you never see that woman ever again in the entire movie, and I guess it's just her only mission was to give Peter the suit, which is kind of weird. The other thing about this Spider-Man in this Spider-Man movies is that it honestly just doesn't feel as much like Spider-Man as the other Spider-Man movies have. You know, Spider-Man is supposed to, you shoot webs all the time. And I think in the first series, it was just a natural web that came out of him. He didn't have to create a device, which I honestly like more, but I know that's not like the original interpretation. But I do kind of enjoy that concept more than them having to create a device. But you can also do some cool stuff with a device, which is not a big complaint. It's just that this Spider-Man also, it doesn't feel like he's super strong and can climb walls and can swing on webs really easily, and he has super strength and he can do all this stuff, and he has spidey senses and he knows all this stuff. You really don't see him use the spidey senses very much throughout this Spider-Man's entire run in any movie that he's been in. And they talk about it being like the Peter Tinkle and whatnot, and that's kind of funny and goofy, but I'd rather just have straight up spider senses from the other Spider-Man movies. I enjoy that interpretation a lot more. I found myself throughout the movie forgetting that he had spider senses, forgetting that he had super strength, or that he can sling webs, because he's so just hesitant to use it all the time, it seems, when like the older Spider-Mans would just use it all the time in just such cool different ways. I forgot like halfway through the movie, oh yeah, that's Spider-Man. Yeah. Like, he can do this and that. Why doesn't he do that? Oh, okay, now it's action. Now he's doing it. So I saw both post-credit scenes, and they were both kind of whatever. They're just setting up for... I hope they're setting up for the next Spider-Man movie, the next movie with Nick Fury in it. Because if they don't, then that's stupid. They reveal that Nick Fury was a Skrull the entire time, and the actual Nick Fury is on a Skrull spaceship. And I don't know if that has anything to do with Captain Marvel. Maybe they'll finally make her canon and make her useful in a movie for once, but... And then there's the one where the dude, which is the same, the one guy that reveals Spider-Man's identity is actually the same guy who I think does it in the original Spider-Man series with Tobey Maguire, which everyone was telling me that, and they thought it was super funny. I guess it is pretty funny. He's a funny guy. And you're just like, I know who the real Spider-Man is. Here's the disturbing news, guys. And I don't know, I thought that was funny and cool. I hope that's really setting up for like the next Spider-Man movie and not just slinging that in and then it having no relevance in the next movies, because otherwise that'd be pretty lame. And he's also framing Spider-Man for doing bad stuff right there and then. Another scene in the movie which I thought was kind of dragged on was like the illusion scene when Spider-Man went to go tell Nick Fury that he knew about that he knew Mysterio was a fraud. And I honestly thought it was kind of stupid that the second Spider-Man saw Nick Fury pulled up to him in a car and he told him to get in. I'm like, dude, that's obviously not Nick Fury. Come on, you're supposed to be fucking Spider-Man, dude. Use any sort of senses to know that that's not Nick Fury. You went to Nick Fury without saying you were going to go to him, so why would he automatically know you're going to be there? Obviously, that is Mysterio right there. But for some reason, he didn't get it. And then after that, they had this huge illusion scene that went on for like 15 minutes or something. And it was cool. A lot of it was pretty cool. Really nice animation. But it really kind of dragged on. Like, after like the 8-minute mark, I was like, are we still doing this? And then it flipped to another thing and another thing. And then it finally gets hit by the train and whatnot. And I'm like, oh, yeesh. My head hurts after all that. But overall, I did think the villain was a pretty good villain. Not so much it being Mysterio, but the way they portrayed Mysterio was pretty interesting. I find the whole like physics of like them being drones and it all being an illusion and Mysterio flying around in that thing itself being an illusion, which I didn't really catch until halfway when I noticed, oh, okay, he's there to jump in and be the real him in the end. Like when he defeated the fire guy, he ran into him, blew it up, and that was all staged, and then he ran in the middle of it, like off the set, just to be at the bottom so that it could be the real him showing up at the bottom of it. And the elementals all being illusions that create all this massive destruction. No, the fire monster really did seem like a fire monster. I mean, he was melting, he was picking up pieces of metal and melting it, and the hydro guy was swimming through all this water, emerging and sloshing, shooting water all over the place. I find it hard to believe that all that was created by just some drones and an illusion. I mean, that those must be some fucking super high-tech drones from like the fucking future to be able to do all that. Also, just the fact that Spider-Man couldn't figure that out at all. And the part where he gets originally recruited to help this mission by the fake Nick Fury, and he's like, oh, can't Doctor Strange do it? He's unavailable. Captain Marvel, don't use her name in vain. Thor, off-world. I'm thinking to myself, why can't Doctor Strange do it? Isn't Doctor Strange like alive and well? Like, if Doctor Strange was on that scene, he would just snap in a second and realize, oh, it's all an illusion, and they'd be done with it. If they had Doctor Strange right there, it would have been done in like moments, and you wouldn't have even needed a whole movie. Choosing Spider-Man to help the fake guy for this job was really, and I mean, when you think of like giant elemental monsters, who's the first person you think to call to help you with this? Probably not Spider-Man. This is a guy who swings through cities and stops crime like that. If there's a guy who can be actually pummeled, and he's quick and he's hard to hit, that's the one you call Spider-Man, not giant elemental monsters in a different country. That's just kind of whack. If they would have called Doctor Strange, it would have been over in seconds. So I thought that was pretty unbelievable. That's kind of how the movie played out. Otherwise, all the side characters like Ned and his temporary girlfriend in the movie were pretty interesting. Just fun to see characters. They didn't really take away from the movie all that much besides Phil's screen time, which isn't necessarily that bad of a thing as long as it's entertaining. But all the side characters I thought were pretty good. The villain, again, overall was honestly pretty good in the end. So, in conclusion, for a movie itself, for like a standalone movie, I'd probably rate this like an 8.5 out of 10, like an 85%. I did think it was pretty good. I think what everybody's saying about how good it is pretty on point. One of my friends was telling me before I saw it that I would probably think it's almost as good as Ragnarok, and Ragnarok and Infinity War are probably my favorite movies in the MCU. And after I saw this movie, I was like, no, it doesn't even come close to Ragnarok. Ragnarok's still way better than this on a large scale. I'd give Ragnarok and Infinity War like a 10 out of 10. I'd give those movie a 10 out of 10 as compared to other Marvel movies. As an overall movie, I'd rate this like an 8.5. As a Marvel movie, with Marvel expectations of this MCU, I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10, a 70%. And then for what I expected out of the movie, I'd also give it a 70% because it was about what I expected it to be. It's maybe a little better than I thought it would be, but there were also some points that really just made me cringe and made me uncomfortable to watch. I had to turn away during a lot of the mushy scenes because it's just like, this is weird, this is uncomfortable, I don't want to see this, doesn't feel like Spider-Man. But overall, it was a pretty good movie. So, that's all. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below for what you think of the movie, and I'll see you guys next week.